I pretty much addressed the one question that was asked, what funds are available in Springfield from the home fund, or the funds that are provided by the federal government, and know how those are filtered down to the state, to the eligible jurisdictions, and also to the state. But based on each of you had great presentations, especially really highlighted the fact that we can do more together when we utilize our state and local partners. And I want to ask you a question on CDBG. And it's just that the CDBG DR says those are federal funds. Do you run into any issues with capacity as far as how to get those funds out and utilized?
Local capacity is always a challenge. So my program, like I mentioned, is designed for rural communities. And so you think about towns of 500 located along a river that got flooded out, and maybe they have a part-time city clerk, and that is their entire workforce. It is incredibly difficult for them to be able to access some of these funds, but we have really strong regional planning commissions throughout the state that can help them through that process along with our staff.
Most correct. And I know that HUD has increased its budget with respect to distressed cities, technical assistance, so providing technical assistance to cities and localities that might need some capacity building. That's something that those funds are available, and we've been instructed to help and get those funds out to the communities that need them. But is there, Bob, one of the things you mentioned on home, and I wanted to know with respect to, you also mentioned workforce, is there any Section 3 requirements with respect to the home funds, and how are those implemented?
Yes. Section 3 was started a few years ago, and what it does is it identifies that if we're going to fund a construction project for a house that's more than $200,000 being invested with federal money, then we ask the contractor that if he's going to hire someone to target a low-income folks to employ. And so they're supposed to have a goal of setting a certain percent of those employees, either employees that they've already hired that were low income, or if they're going to hire new ones, focus their advertising and marketing toward folks that are from the low income community. It's part of the job creation, job retention program.
There's one of the things, Bob, you mentioned, one of the things you mentioned, it was interesting to me, on land trusts. How does that work? Is it an equity sharing kind of arrangement for individuals and help the individuals to get into their first homes?
Yes, sir. The history of land trusts goes back now about 15 years. When I was first hired, the department director at that time did some research, and he noticed that the price of housing in St. Louis was lower than it was in Springfield. But the price of housing in St. Louis was lower, but the incomes were higher. We had lower income here in Springfield. And so he told my boss at that time, he said, check into a land trust, see what it's all about. And so they started researching one, and we formed one in 2008. I think it was about 2008 when we formed the land trust. And what it is you buy the house, but you're financing only about 80% of the value of that house. And so that immediately lowers your mortgage payment. The rest of it is subsidized. What you're doing is you're buying the house and leasing the land. And what we found is that with the price you pay for the lease of the land plus your mortgage payment being so low, it was cheaper to buy one of those land trust houses than to rent a house of the same quality. And so that's how it got started. And it's basically a grassroots thing here with the planning department director deciding, let's see what the land trust is all about. And they are currently operating, and they do some rentals too, affordable rentals. But the nice thing is the ground lease, it allows for resale back to the land trust when you're ready to sell, and you share the equity of what benefits you gained. If the price of that house went up so much, since you didn't pay full price, you share the equity with the land trust, and then they in turn can buy it back at a fair price to you and make it affordable for 99 more years.
And that's really, it's a way of individuals to get into homes, especially in trying to look at alternatives, and it's the CDBG, well, not DR, but they're in annual. What are the eligible, what are the eligible uses of CDBG? Not DR necessarily, but just CDBG, and especially can it be utilized in the sense of helping individuals at home or infrastructure uses or?
Yeah, and I'll talk specifically about the programs that we offer now and the ones that we have. But I would first just note the conversation about the land trust, I think, highlights why rural affordable housing is so important. Is that while there are certainly really great needs here in the city of Springfield for additional housing, there's also resources that are available at the local level to help address some of those needs. And rural communities throughout the state don't have those same resources or structures available to put into place. And so those programs that do target smaller communities and helping them to thrive are just as important. And so in terms of our program, the one that we offer right now that can be the most beneficial to communities is our demolition program. So we can fund the demolition of vacant and dilapidated structures throughout a community, essentially provide a one-time investment with private property owner consent to come in, remove those dilapidated structures so that those properties are reopened for new development without having a private or a special tax lien or a special assessment against the property to recoup that cost that cities would normally do. So that's one program that we offer right now that can support housing development or redevelopment. Aside from those other programs that I talked about previously, I think it's just important to note that I talked about acquisition of property. We can cover legal costs. We can cover design costs. We can cover the infrastructure costs. There's so many ways that we can step in to help reduce that cost of development to bring it into market alignment. And the really beautiful thing is that the program is so flexible in terms of what we can fund that we're able to craft that sort of hyper-local project that addresses each community's needs.
That's great. Yeah, one of the things that as regional administrators are going throughout the different states and also talking with the other the other 9 regional administrators in the country, one of the things that I hear is this whole idea of getting data. So in order to have a better idea of what are the needs, what are the community needs, and for instance, Kansas did a comprehensive, a couple years ago, a comprehensive needs assessment. Is there something, and you mentioned in your presentation, an opportunity to participate in the annual survey. How is that disseminated? Is there a process where that kind of data is being gathered to get a better idea of what are the needs in rural Missouri, or what are the needs in all of Missouri as far as the housing and
Yeah, I'll answer from the state side, and then I'm sure the city. The city is in the middle of their process right now, so I'm sure Bob will have some thoughts as well.
Right.
But as far as the state, it's you can first access that survey. It's distributed through our email distribution system. Connecting with a regional planning commission is a great opportunity to get connected to that resource. We will do public notices and postings in newspapers throughout the state. Historically, we've held meetings in really each quadrant of the state to make sure that we're engaging communities throughout. And we hold like those targeted public engagement sessions where we invite the public to come and speak. We do consultations with specific types of entities to make sure that throughout the housing and community development spectrum that we're getting feedback from those organizations that are actually boots on the ground doing the work, like a lot of the folks here. And then finally, we have an actual public hearing that we do up in Jeff City once we finalize the draft that we ask folks to give feedback on.
Good.
I'm remiss about my presentation. Brandon mentioned that their 5-year plan starts in 2027. Ours starts next July for a 5-year plan that we have to submit to HUD. So we're processing right now the input for that. And so take your pen and write down springfieldmo.gov. And on the city's website, you can click on a link and there's a survey where we ask you all the questions about, is housing more important than economic development, or what parts of economic development did you want us to spend the money on? And we are taking that right now. We've had about 1,400, I think, people look at the survey, and over 900 have actually responded. Send a link to everybody you know, anybody that has some input in Springfield's operations. It's a valuable input. We use that to direct our funds.
Got the red light. Okay, all right, the red dot, okay.
I was thinking if you guys wanted me to answer a few questions, you can try to take that from the people.
Great.
Saying that. Anybody have a question? Oh, sorry, someone, gosh. I want to lunch.
So I have two questions. My first question is, any of your housing grants and funding that you use, why aren't you making the standard of every new build being accessible? Because you have talked, like Bob, about, hey, we wanting people to be able to age in place, or we're using funding to rehab homes so people are able to age in place. Why isn't that not the standard accessibility for any new constructions, local or statewide?
Well, I'll answer that from the state's perspective. We do include requirements that a certain portion of the units be made ADA accessible, and then under HUD funding, they're required to make accommodations as necessary for the occupants based off of their need. I personally recognize that likely doesn't go far enough, especially looking at the demographics of the folks that make up a lot of the populations in our rural communities. But it's this balancing act that we have to try and achieve. And I know the home team through the Housing Collaborative at CPO is doing some really good work in this area. But a balance of trying to make sure that we're maximizing ultimately the number of units being created, because there is such a deficit in these communities, with the need to provide these units that are accessible, but can increase the cost and reduce the number of units available. So we do our best to thread that needle and make sure that we're providing a mixture of units that maximizes ultimately the number of units brought online. But that is certainly, if there's feedback that folks have about the way we've structured our program, that community needs survey really is the best time to give us that, or you can shoot an email, send a call, and I'd love to talk through it.
Yeah, the community typically doesn't think about it until it personally affects them. And so, gets up front, we use that funding wisely. It may be a little bit more upfront, but long term, people will be able to utilize it when they are thinking about it. And so we have this opportunity to create these new homes, truly be creating these new homes so they are lifetime homes for these individuals. Not later down the road when something occurs, I can't stay here now because it's not accessible. Well, guess what? We've already made it accessible for you, so you can stay here. And those fundings that we're using to, refab homes or making them accessible, we could use those funds to go to new housing because these homes there are all accessible. So that's my first question. Thank you for answering that. My second question is I help support individuals who are on Medicaid, Medicare, and some of my folks are really blessed that they have really great monthly checks, except the state of Missouri, federal money is saying, hey, you have to pay for some of your care. So it always dwindles down to they only really truly see maybe $9,000 a month. Well, that really kicks them out of some of these affordable housing because ultimately their grand total has this huge number, but ultimately that number doesn't even hit their bank because the state or federal withdraws that money before it even hits the bank. So are we looking into some of these spin downs for healthcare as these are acceptable to get into affordable housing?
Well, of course, that sounds like it's more of a state issue rather than the federal government is not going to be dictating with respect to that issue. But what we do, what we are able to do is to make sure that when we experience individuals that are rent burdened at only 30%, no more than 30%, those individuals that are receiving a subsidy, no more than 30% of their income has to be utilized for housing. So I wanted to get a better understanding of with respect to something that HUD is involved in. That's what I want to speak, but
Okay,
help.
I'm loud enough.
Yeah.
Bob, I'm going to pick on you. Some of our homes we go through the city to rent, and it's very few and far between. But we do have some individuals that I support that have you get the award letter, so that's stating, hey, this is how much their Social Security or SSI is. They look at the grand total. They don't consider the spin down. They look at the grand total. So whenever your grand total is this large amount, some of my folks aren't eligible for this program, even though they never see that grand total. Does that make sense?
No.
It does make sense to me because I understand that.
Sorry,
No, that. I think what she's getting at is that in the income requirements for the occupancy for high-funded housing is that we have to look at the gross income for the household. And there's a whole list of things that we can exclude from that income. And the spend down is not one of the exclusions. So what happens is that we have to look at that top number. We're not allowed to ignore the fact that they're not really receiving it. And it's a tough thing.
That's really few or far between. But, as life grows and as we continue, some of our folks are going to be hitting that cap. They never receive that total funding. They're having to pay for the kicker. It never even hits their banking account. And it does not matter whatever their gross income. Mm-hmm. And if it's too much, it disqualifies them. Like really, truly, that is a gross income because they are having to pay for their allocator.
No, that's a great point. I have to say that I have traveled throughout the region, and this is the first time, unfortunately, or maybe fortunate, that I've heard that question asked. And so I will take that back to with me to definitely to the regional office and then to headquarters, because it's something that I'd like to know there's something that we evidently. I need more information on that in order to address it, but I really appreciate the question.
We'll just take one more question, sorry.
My question is very similar to her first question, but when you're rehabbing or building new communities, are you using universal design principles in these homes?
Yes, we do. We use universal design principles. Some of them, it's like Brandon talked about, we have an obligation to get the money on the street and do the construction. And we're working with both nonprofit and for-profit developers. And they look at the bottom line, and the cost of construction is straining everything. And a lot of times even though universal design itself may not cost that. And there's different studies that say it's a very little amount the cost for universal design. But in some cases, the footprint of the house has to be larger because of larger hallways, maybe larger rooms and stuff like that. And that footprint jacks the price up per square foot because you now have a house that's maybe 15, 20% larger than a other house. So it's a balancing act, and the developers themselves say, even ones that have done universal design almost religiously since we started the program back when I was meeting with Tina and some of her group with the home team. Even some of them have said, I can't afford it this time. This house won't cash flow because of the rent restrictions and what that kind of thing. So it's a balancing act. We always consider it in every construction project.
Yeah, and I would just add from our perspective, in addition to what I talked about earlier, we also see developers, whenever they're designing a project in these communities, they typically have a target clientele that they're trying to serve, whether that's veterans within the community, individuals with disabilities. And so while we only mandate that a certain portion of the units be ADA accessible at the time of construction, we have seen developers, whenever they're designing with that intentionality of the folks they're trying to serve, willingly incorporating those requirements or those elements into their projects to better serve the people that they're trying to reach. And just going to the previous question, I know we need to wrap up, and so I just wanted to say this. I think your comment may have spoke to a specific instance of housing unaffordability, but I think it really speaks to the larger issue of just folks in our community, in our state, and in our nation are struggling to meet their demands for meeting their housing costs as well as their child care costs and their health care costs. Right. And so it's events like this that really bring people together, allow us to share ideas and resources that we can all bring to the table to start really making meaningful changes both within the public operations and the resources that are available, but also the way that the development community and the lending community are thinking about how we're supporting these projects. So I just want to thank everybody for being here. I'm really excited to hear the rest of the conversation for the day.